Are you struggling to make your portraits look more cinematic? In this video, we will explore the Vignette tool to completely transform your shots. My name is Edward, and I'm your friendly photographer's guide to the Pacific Northwest. In this Lightroom beginner series, we're gonna use the simplest tools to transform your photos one slider at a time. What is a vignette? A vignette is when the corners of your photo is darker or lighter than the center. Think of it like you're creating your own natural spotlight effect. Done right, it draws attention to your subject and makes your image feel more cinematic. Done wrong, it could look really tacky and look too altered. Hello. Welcome to Lightroom. Today we're going to be covering over vignettes, and I'm going to show you how you can get your photos from looking like this into something like this. As you can tell, the subject is bright. Right away, your eyes are drawn to the subject. You can see that spotlight being shown on the figure. The easiest way to get there is using the Vignette tool. Right from the launch of Lightroom, make sure that you're in the develop module of the program, and you can see from the very top over here that I have developed highlighted. And to find the settings for vignetting, you gotta go over here to the right side, past basic, past tone curve, and all these other ones until you find that sidebar called effects. And here lives Post-Crop Vignetting. Already you can see that I have already messed a little bit with the sliders here. So let's go ahead and reset the image back to its original settings. Immediately you can see that the whole photo is illuminated. If that's something that you want to do for your photo, great. But here in this photo, I really want to show off the subject. You can see that the surroundings are bright. What we want to do is we want to add a spotlight straight towards the figure to give it more of an impact in the photo. So let's go ahead and just slide over the priority to the left, which makes the edges of the image a lot darker, bringing focus to the subject. So as we move it over to the left, let's give it a -50. Already it's eliminating a lot of that brightness that was initially there from the edges. And what that does to the eye is that it draws it to the middle of the image. And you can see that we really want to highlight her face here. It basically decreases the exterior of the image. It darkens them so where your eye naturally sits in the middle. So if you were to compare back to 0, image is super bright, but as we pull it down to -50, you can see the subject of the image is being reinforced. Our eyes tend to gravitate towards things that are bright, so we're adding that spotlight effect onto the image to make the subject really stand out. That's just only using a mount, that top slider over here. Typically, you can pretty much just settle with just the amount. You only need a little bit of vignetting to get your subject to pop out. Let me go ahead and give you another example of how you can use vignetting to your advantage using these extra sliders. Subtlety is key. A little vignette can make your subject pop, but a little too much can feel heavy-handed. All right, so we have swapped over to a picture that I took of Serena, and we can see that the photo is pretty even throughout in terms of lighting. By using vignettes, we can really level up the photo by adding in that spotlight to really make her pop. So let's go ahead and see what the difference that makes. And you can see in this photo, your eyes are more gravitated towards the subject because of the darkening of the background behind her. And we really are using post-crop vignetting to be able to achieve that effect. But let me go ahead and kind of go to show you guys what midpoint means, what roundness means, and what feather means. So you can find these controls under basic all the way down through tone curve at the bottom with effects. And we can see midpoint, roundness, and feather. So to best demonstrate how this actually works, we're just gonna go ahead and bump the amount to -100 just to really show you how vignetting works. And I'm gonna increase the feather to 0 so you could really see the shape of the vignette that is occurring in the photo. So what is midpoint? Good question. So the midpoint, as you can tell, what it does, it controls the size of the vignette. So you can see that the circle, or I should say oval, you can see it gradually get bigger and smaller. So ideally what you want to do is you want to fit that circle just to fit on the subject that you want to select. And then what it's going to do is going to automatically darken the edges of the photo, so that way that she's going to be standing out in the spotlight. So that's what Midpoint does. And that brings me to roundness, whether your vignette is more circular or rectangular. So right now it's set to -27, but we can play around with the image and you can see that you can have it to be really rectangular, or you could really set it to have that circle look. So you can play around with this. As you can see, this is a pretty tall subject and it spans from the top and the bottom of the photo. So we want the roundness to really make sure that we cover the whole extent of her body. When you punch roundness to 100, it cuts off like the top of her head. So you want to pull it back, so that way it makes sure that her bottom boot right here and the top of her head is included in the vignette. There. So now I feel pretty good about the midpoint and the roundness of the vignette. And now we could really mess with the feather, which controls how soft or how harsh the edges can be. So if this is something that you want, is like this really cool circle photo of your subject, this is something that you can do. Experiment, try. These sliders are like paintbrushes to your images. So it's best to experiment and try for yourself. But in this case, the feather is set to 0. So it's a pretty harsh edge. So if you really want to give that natural unedited look, you would want to set the feather a little higher. And as I pull up on the feather, you could see it kind of melt away. So a default that I like to use is I like to keep it standard at 50. I think it's a really good balance of the gradient between the exterior of the photo and the focus of the subject. And remember, before we set it to -100, so it looks pretty harsh right now. But for most portraits, you can really go for something like -30 to get that spotlight effect that you'd want. Again, just for reference, if you're back at 0, you can see that it's very bright. But remember, we had set our midpoint, we had set our roundness to perfectly go around the subject. So when you bump down that amount of vignetting, you could really see the background melt away. That is the basic concepts of amount, midpoint, roundness, and feather. Really, with most portraits, what you can do is you can give it like a -35, and that's gonna give you a pretty cookie cutter way to improve your photo is by adding in that spotlight. So let's go ahead and just do that right now. Go ahead, punch in -35, and right away you can see that the subject is being illuminated, or rather not illuminated, but it's a trickery of the eye. By making things in the background darker, you're bringing focus towards the subject, which gives it an illusion of it being illuminated. And that's what we want to level up our portraits. If you found value in this lesson so far, consider subscribing for more Lightroom tutorials. Remember this, vignettes aren't just for darkening. Light vignettes can be used for dreamy, airy effects. All right, so we have jumped over to Tiffany here at the library, and it's a really cool shot just because her expression is awesome and she's looking into the camera, and what's key is that she's pretty centered in the frame. So using vignetting, what you can do is you can bring the focus of the eye to her face by using vignettes. Already you can see that the exterior of the photo is darkened to really give that illusion that her face is being lit up. But here's the thing, vignettes can go the other direction. It can also brighten the background to really give it an airy look. So let's go ahead and go from -35 to something light, like a +10. As we bring it up to +10, now we have really brightened up the photo, and that creates that really nice milky smoothness to the photo. And you can tell that these small haze around is adding a little bit more airiness, dreaminess to the photo. And I think it really works in this photo because you're already working with a lot of warm tones. So by adding that +10 amount to the vignettes, we're adding light to the background to create a more cohesive look. But really you can go both ways in this photo. Like +10, you got it light, but again, really cookie cutter way to use it is -35 for portraits. it really goes the other direction and pulls away from the background and more onto the subject. It really depends on what kind of mood that you want for your photo. If you want something more cinematic, dramatic, go ahead and lower that vignette down to, you know, you can go even more to like -68, and you're still gonna create that artificial studio effect. But in this photo, you can kind of see that it's altered on the sides. This is where you want to be careful about adding too much vignettes to your image, because it starts to look like it's altered, which is why -35 is a really good number to use for portraits specifically, because it creates a more gradual gradient across the photo. So it makes it seem more natural and that your eye tends to gravitate towards the subject. So that's a really good key tip for -35. But if you want to make that airy, dreamy kind of look, I really love using +10, because what it does, it adds that milky flavor to the photo. That's the best way to describe it, because you're adding those whites, you're adding those highlights into the photo, which really gives it that airy look. So that's the key thing for portraits, is if you want to make it airy, +10 for sure. And if you want to make it, you know, cinematic, -35 is something I'd use. Match the vignette to your photo. For wide landscapes, it's best to keep it soft. Let's take a landscape photo as an example. What's really cool about vignettes is that you can actually use it in landscape photos as well. So here I got the shot of the sunset. With some previous edits and vignetting, you can create dramatic images just like this. As you can tell, the sun is the subject of the photo here, and the use of vignetting here is to draw the viewer's eye towards the sun. Here I have some pretty extreme settings. I got -42 on the amount, 0 midpoint, roundness 51, and feather on 79. But let's go ahead and reset everything back to 0. So we can really play around with this image. So now that I have everything set generally back to 0, there's two ways that you can take this. You can look at this photo and you can think, hey, I want to make it brighter. I want to make it feel ethereal. I don't know if I said that right. Or you can make it more cinematic and make it dark. So let's go ahead and try it with option A and try to make it real dark. So the first thing I like to do, again, with landscape photos, you don't want to go -35. That's really used for portraits, but for landscape photos, you can do something like -20. So we're pulling back and you can see in the image that it's darkening the exteriors, but you don't want to do it too much because you can really see it on the exteriors, the outer edges of the photo. So -20 is a good point here. So now we're going to do option B and try to make it a more of an airy, dreamy look. So let's go ahead, bump everything back to 0. In this case, we're going to bump it up to +10. And this is actually not going to work in this photo because the white is just standing out way too much. So we're going to have to choose something a little bit more subtle. Barely, we're going to give it a +1. And that creates that aura around the edges. So we can see here that it actually might be a little bit too harsh for the whites. So we're going to go ahead and increase the feather to make it more soft. And we're going to adjust the midpoint to where it only affects the corners here. I know it's not big of a change, but the very subtle thing here is that we have a +1 amount on the vignette to give it that background a little boost, to give it more of a welcome feeling, like a little bit splotch of paint on the picture, if you will. But I just want to let you know that this is possible. Like, you can experiment. Like, if you really like the whites, if you wanted to do something, you know, super edgy, I guess, or experimental, like if you take a look at this photo, like even though it's unorthodox, it is still a cool image. You can play around with it. You're not really tied to certain rules. Like if you wanted to have like a cool, like alternate dimension kind of like look, then yeah, play around with it. You don't necessarily have to follow the rules of this. If you would just want to play around with editing, you know, pop off, man. Yeah, I know it's a little extreme on the editing, but not gonna lie, this is a pretty dope photo. It feels like a portal to a different world. And that's the beauty of Lightroom, is that you get to experiment, try out your paintbrushes, your sliders, and kind of tinker with your photo to like see what the end result's gonna be like. You know, it's kind of crazy that you can go from an image like this where it seems pretty bland, and you can teleport it into something completely different. It looks like this is like when you're dying and this is the last thing that you'll see before you die. That's the beauty of Lightroom. You can really experiment and play around with this tool. Again, it's down here on effects and vignetting. Play around with these settings and kind of see for yourself what suits your style. Who knows, you can do a whole series on photos that look like portals here. It's super fun. I recommend you guys to try and experiment, because that's what Lightroom is for. It's a place of discovery and to refine your style in photography. Check out the rest of my Lightroom Basics series here in this playlist to level up your photo game. If you found this helpful, smash that like button. So that's the Vignette tool in Lightroom. Simple but powerful. The next time you edit, try adding a little touch and see how it transforms the mood in your photos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!